Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We are going to be talking with Rosalys Peel, who put her skills as an educator to the test and decided to write a book about her experience with her husband, Mike, who was suffering from dementia, and the two of them decided through Alzheimer's to work together through his illness. We'll talk with Rosalys about the experience that came after her decision to share her story, which has been warmly received, and many of us here on the call have read it. And then I want to first mention that our program, Something to Talk About, is sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers independent living, assisted living, and memory care. They have a lovely campus up on Rolling Bay, and they would love to have you come look at it. Randy O'Neill or Sierra Wood would be glad to show you around. Call 206-594-1010, and they'll treat you to lunch or dinner. Check out the website as well, fieldstonecommunities.com. And we are meeting on the ancestral homeland of the Puget Sound Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish, the people of the clear salt water who have lived in these areas since time immemorial. We honor them and are learning from their stewardship of these lands and waters. Rosalys, thank you very much for agreeing to have this conversation. I really appreciate it. We talked a few years ago. I think a couple of times we've talked on this program with you, and I think also with Flory Munette about the sort of the effort of writing about your experiences after helping a spouse who had dementia. And I'm interested today in getting some sense about sort of what you learned about yourself and what you've learned just in general after going through that challenging process of writing, publishing, and promoting a book, Mike and Me.
Thank you. I want to say, first of all, I've had a nice experience going to Fieldstone a couple of times and presenting. They have a wonderful support group there. So a shout out about Fieldstone as well. So yeah, this is real fun. This is a little different than some presentations because it's kind of saying, where am I now and what's going on in between? But to kind of put it in its time frame, I just wrote down some years to just kind of keep it straight for myself. Mike died in 2011. And at that time, I was 67. There was 8 years between us. So he was 75. And he'd been ill for 9 years, which people are typically interested in how long. And I would say it was an easy 3 years where you're just in that grief process. It's different for everybody, but I had these journal notes and I thought someday I might do some writing, but that was not even a consideration for 3 years. And you're just kind of getting your feet on the ground and sort of informally, Ann and I were talking about family during the illness and how important it is. I have to say it was extremely important after the illness. And at first, when somebody passes away, one of the big things that is so strange is it's so quiet around your house. You know, that person was always there and they were ill and you had people coming and going, and then it just stops and you're by yourself. And it's those little everyday things that are so peculiar. Where do you eat? I mean, do you want to eat by yourself in the living room or do you turn on the TV? I mean, of course, Mike, the last month certainly wasn't able to do what he could before, but we still ate meals together. I always sat with him when he was eating. So that was strange. And the house has strange sounds. I mean, it's like, what was that noise? And it's just an odd thing. It takes a while to get through that. So that's another whole thing about grief and coming through it. But I will say my two sisters came in. They were visiting off and on. One's from Fairbanks, Alaska, the other from Colorado at that time. I have a daughter local. She had 1 2.5-year-old when Mike passed away and was pregnant with another, which I did not know at the time of Mike's death. So Gavin came into our life about 8 months later, so had another small person. And I did end up helping out with the children 1 or 2 days a week. So that was huge. That was huge. I did not give up my profession of teaching parent ed at Swedish. And so that was still in place for me. That was one of my smarter moves. I cut way back, but I continued not to give up my job. I was at an age where I could have just quit the job, but instead I kept that. So that meant I went from teaching multiple days a week down to 1 when Mike was working and could come back and increase that afterwards. So that was important for me to do that. Um, One of the great losses, I had no one to travel with. You know, Mike and I hadn't been doing much of it the last few years, but I felt like I was in the age group where I'd like to do that. And how do I do that? So I actually reached out to old friends in California, and they had been in the same play group I had when my kids were little. And I said, I don't have anybody to travel with. Do you want to take a trip with me? And we did. They came up and we went to McMinimum's in Portland, which was really fun. And then at the end of that trip, I said, maybe we can do it every 2 years. And they said, heck no, let's go every year. So we have been making a trip every year. During COVID, we did not, but we've been all over, 4 women. And believe it or not, I'm going to Arkansas in a few weeks with these ladies. I don't know why Arkansas, but that's what we're doing. So reaching out to other people was huge and taking a risk. I hadn't had a lot of time with them in a long time. And
Now,
then
had you, was that a hard thing to do? I know for some people, that's a
yeah.
real hurdle, to try to think about the right way to connect. Um,
It wasn't too hard to connect with them, but in general, the hard hurdle was doing things by yourself. Going to the grocery store was a hard hurdle. You didn't want to bump into anybody. You didn't want to talk about this. So my sister had advice given to her when her husband died, which was just say yes. Just say yes. You know, you're in doubt. You don't know if you want to do this alone. Do you want to go to that thing by yourself? You always did it as a couple. And she said, they just told me to say yes. And so going out to dinner with 2 or 3 couples, and now you're a single. And so that was hard. But I would say reaching out to women, just doing something with women who'd been friends years ago, that was a little easier for me.
I do know that we definitely uh, have folks who show up at the senior community center, maybe a few weeks after they've lost a partner, and just show up for a knitting group or for
Yeah,
an exercise class, something where you may not feel like you need an excuse to explain why you're there. And then
exactly.
you can kind of sidle in and make some contacts that are not directly connected to the
Yeah.
grief you've been going through.
New places, new people. Absolutely. So anyway, and then my niece did a nice thing. I said, you know, I was kind of lamenting I didn't have anyone to go camping with anymore. She was all of 10 and she said, I'll go with you. So I now have an annual camp trip at Fay Bainbridge with the nieces and grandchildren. So yeah, she's now 23 and helps me with marketing. So what can I say? So anyway, 3 years after going through all this grief stuff, I decided I'd try and write. And as many of you know, I ran into Dan Zadra, who knew how to do that. The writing process took 3 years. So writing a book in general, I can't recommend it to anyone. Maybe if you're an author already, but for somebody like myself who that was brand new for, I don't know. But yeah, Dan's name's on my book down there at the bottom. I'll hold it up here for you as well. But he really made a difference to me and he knew how to do it. So we had to take some time to do it. So once we started talking and figuring out what I had to say that was different than other people, it took 3 years to get the book out. So now we are 6 years since Mike passed away, and I figured out my age. I was probably 73 or 74 and publishing a book for the first time. So talk about a new chapter. And then the whole thing of publishing a book. I had been self-employed before because I taught my own childbirth classes here on the island and on the peninsula, and then worked for Swedish as well. So I kind of knew about self-employment, but I did not know about publishing. And that's a big deal. There's quarterly taxes, there's a business license, there's an annual report. If you sell books yourself in another state, you've got to pay taxes to that state. So I'd started going out and speaking in different states, and then you have to figure that out. So that whole thing was big, and probably one of the biggest things to me, and Dan kind of knew it, but it turned out to be a real financial thing that we didn't have figured out, is when you post something like on Facebook, which we were, then it pops up, do you want to boost the post? Now, if you boost the post, anytime anybody who looks at it, it costs you a couple of cents. So if somebody's just perusing things on dementia, they happen to peruse mine. If they click that in, it's going to cost me another 2 cents. And it doesn't mean they bought the book. It just means because they boost the post, it's out there. So financially, that was really, really costly. Dan and I both were using somebody to help us with marketing. We were both putting a few thousand in every month into that, but we were going in the hole. So that was kind of a rude awakening that you don't want to boost your post with the small thing we were doing. So anyway, we got out of that and sort of changed gears. About the same time, then COVID hit. So just as we're kind of moving forward with marketing, COVID comes along, and that really was different. I had made a presentation in Reno at the Rotary Club, and one of the people who went to that was somebody who was the head of the VA. And this VA woman, who was the head of the VA in Northern California, came up to me afterwards and she said, "Our VA people need to hear you speak." And so from that, I got invited to be part of the Nevada task force. And that was done on Zoom for the next 2.5 years. And I did a conference for them and was part of their committee figuring out what can we do to help VA members to get through this. So that was a real honor. So that happened because of Zoom. We're doing this today, probably because of COVID. I mean, we didn't function this way. I don't know, Reed, did you have this going on at all before Zoom or not?
No, the idea of how to operate the senior center when we couldn't be in person. I see Lawrence Chan just joined,
Hi,
and
Lauren.
Lawrence and Bonnie had just moved to Bainbridge, and I knew them by the square of a Zoom window for a couple of years before I actually met them in person, even
Yeah.
though they were members of the Senior and Community Center. So I think that yes, it opened our eyes, and there, I mean, that has been kind of a good thing to come out of the experience is the idea that we have these options, and certainly
That
the kind
that
of work that I'm sorry, yes, Lawrence?
okay, that really kept us connected during the COVID. You were doing it 5 days a week, and we were there every day, and we met a lot of good people, and we ended up meeting them in person, which was a surprise.
That's right.
To move during COVID, I mean, that was huge because you're in a spot where you can't meet people, and here's the senior center there for you. So, and they were there for
Exactly.
me because was able to present to them as well and got to know you guys that way.
That's
Yeah,
right.
for sure.
Yeah, so that began sort of, or maybe it didn't begin, but the idea of the presentations and travel that you've done, Rosalys, to share the insights from the book with specific communities, right?
Yeah, it changed. I will say, I've done a few long distance, but I've been invited to do a couple of national things. I just was in Tucson, and Tucson was a real special treat because that came about from the retirement group Mike was connected with. So he was retired customs. Well, now that group is retired customs and Homeland Security, which has a real mixed message for all of us at the moment. But it was an honor to speak to them, and they were very professional about it. And I gave a presentation and had nice comments. There was probably about, I don't know, it was a good sized group, 50, 60 people. And then I did United Way in Minnesota, Michigan about this time. So those were long distance talks, but most of us pretty local with Rotary clubs and churches and that kind of group that's really supported me, which has been great.
Well, and I think, I know that I've really benefited from reading your book and talking to you to have a better idea of the kinds of challenges that people are going through. I have had some experience myself in helping my wife and her father when my mother-in-law had dementia, had Alzheimer's, and then but everybody's story is so different, and yet there are commonalities of the experience of caregiving that you've been able to sort of highlight.
Thank you. And that was, the whole goal of the book was to decrease some fear and some misconceptions about Alzheimer's. And I am really honored that that's something that comes up often in conversations or just odd little ways where somebody said, "Oh, I read your book and I'm kinder to my partner," or something along that line. And that was the goal of the book. So I feel like it's been quite successful. The marketing and all of that is just an ongoing challenge, but I feel good about that. So any other thoughts about how that book came together? Or I had two other sort of little topics I wanted to mention. I wanted to talk about some of the new things, and then just sort of insights about Alzheimer's, and then of course what I learned and what is so fun right now. So those
Yeah,
are
I was curious about the idea of sort of what you learned about yourself. You have touched already on some
yeah,
new aspects, new areas of
yeah.
surprising strength, maybe, and fear.
Yeah, let me just go to that when I put it at the end, but it doesn't have to be in any order. And I wrote down all the things that we gave as teasers for people to come. I thought I'd better hit them all. So, what I learned about myself, I wrote a couple down, and then the last one I put a big star by. So, the first one I wrote down was I love to teach and make a difference. And, even way back when I was little, I wanted to be a nurse. And at one point, I wanted to be in the Peace Corps. And then I met Mike and changed my mind about the Peace Corps, decided on him instead. So that's just kind of who I am. I like to make a difference. So, but I kind of knew that having a passion is important to me. I kind of knew that. The third one, I'm okay without Mike. And I kind of knew that too, I think. I knew it was hard not to have him, but basically I felt okay. But I would say what was really new to me that I did not expect is that there's new beginnings and new chapters. That was off my radar. I published the book at about 75. I never, ever in my wildest dreams believed I'd be a publisher and an author. I mean, I was a nurse and I was an educator, but to publish a book, I mean, to start with, I'm not, I'm not a person who was real skilled with the reading, writing, and arithmetic stuff. I'm not a person who was a natural writer. I had to work hard at it. And that I've published a book that is actually doing exactly what I hoped it would, make a difference to people with Alzheimer's. That to me is phenomenal. And I don't give it much thought most of the time, but when the question came to me, I thought at 75, to be a publisher and an author, when you've never done that before, that's a real new chapter. And I've talked to other people who've had other different kinds of new chapters. And Reed, you must come across that all the time at the senior center. People who go down one path and they pivot. Maybe they're an artist now, or maybe they're a caregiver now. And I think it's exciting about our age to know that can happen.
Yes, I think that in fact, as we live longer, and this is a great thing to pass on to our children and grandchildren, the idea that life is not one thing. You don't pick one way of being and expect that that's going to go on forever. And I do think that at about that age, somewhere in the 60s to 70s, there's often a time to pivot and take on a new challenge and learn something. It certainly happened to me. I was laid off from being in the news business. Didn't ever think I was ever going to be a director of a senior community center. And it's just been a delightful experience that opened my eyes to new areas of myself as well. So maybe that's partly why I asked the question, because
Right.
I realized that in my own life.
Yeah. So I would put that right up there. Yeah, and then I'll say a little bit more about that right at the end. And
Okay.
I'll just add this, and then we can talk about new things in Alzheimer's, which I have to say is kind of like repeating what you've probably heard before. But I would say presenting is really fun for me. I mentioned some of the different places I've presented. I'd say Rotary clubs have been phenomenal. Churches are wonderful. I just got an invitation today from the Mennonite Church not Mennonite, Manette Church, and to speak there at a luncheon meeting, which I'm excited about. Independent living communities have been great. Um, yeah, each one. Oh, and I think I said this before. Every time a book gets out there, I know it's making a difference. So it doesn't have to be a large number of sales. Just if you know somebody and you give them a book, or somebody else passes a book on to somebody, I know that it makes a difference, which is great. And then as far as other things in my life, the place where I went and wrote was in Montana, and I still go over there a couple of times a year. That was a little cabin my father-in-law built. And I started doing Zoom board meetings with them, because you can do that. And they're working on refurbishing a little school, 1920 schoolhouse. So now I'm on the board, and we're into this big fundraising project. So how did that ever happen to me? But it's fun. And so that's another thing. And then I'm in 2 book clubs. One of them, I love both of them, of course, but one of them is just interesting because my niece, my little niece who said I could go camping with me, she organized this with our family, and we do it on Zoom. And so that covers my sister in Alaska and a couple of people from California, and just kind of a small group of relatives on a Zoom meeting. And it's nice to see those family members, once a month, which I wouldn't see otherwise. So again, Zoom, made that happen for us. So yeah, my life is pretty full, and I love all those things.
So tell us a little bit about what are new developments
Yeah.
in Alzheimer's research.
And like I said, I don't know exactly the last time I was here at the senior center. So, it's relatively new, but you may have heard this somewhere else. I think one of the big things is we're really talking more about mild cognitive impairment. Have you been hearing about that, Reese? Reed?
Yeah, and in fact, I just got a note about the idea that undiagnosed mild cognitive impairment leaves you vulnerable to things like financial risk that you may not be aware of the fact that you have a vulnerability.
Right, right. So we know that that is something that is happening now, and the statistics on that are after 60, about 12 to 18% can have that. It does not mean that you're going to actually go into Alzheimer's. It increases your risks of about 10 to 15% actually go into Alzheimer's. So just be aware that that's something that happens, and doesn't mean you're going to have Alzheimer's, but it is something to be aware of. It may be stable for a while, or it may improve. We don't know the cause of mild cognitive impairment, but we used to think, oh, I'm going to have Alzheimer's, or this is terrible, instead of just recognizing it's something reasonably common that happens to 12 to 18%. And that's just some, memory difficulties after about age 60. One of the studies that is fascinating, and of course, there's repeated studies about exercise, but one of them is fascinating in that particular study. They talk about aerobics or stretching for 12 months, just stretching aerobics for 12 months. They found that when they did a comparison study, that people who did that showed a significant difference, and those who did not, then they stayed the same. But they made a difference when they did that, or they could have a decline with it. Risk factors for Alzheimer's, there's 2 we can't do anything about. We're just stuck with them. One is our age, and one is a genetic link. So we're stuck with those. Although I will say there are studies that even indicate with a genetic link, some of the things we now know that help you with Alzheimer's can be significant, even with a genetic link. And of course, the one we star on that is exercise. The ones that can make a difference and we have some control over: diabetes, obesity, smoking, cholesterol, alcohol, head injuries, and elevated blood pressure. Those are all things we can have some control over. I went to the doctor a while ago, and one of the statements she said to me is, just stay off the ladders. I mean, that's like, we don't want any head injuries, no head injuries. So, and then we know what we can do about blood pressure and obesity and diabetes and smoking and cholesterol. Those are all treatable. So of course they want it to be treatable for Alzheimer's someday too, but those things we can all prevent. Things that decrease your risk, and these have been there for a while: more education, decrease your risks; social, which we're doing right now, all the stuff at the senior center. I don't get down there to do things, but boy, I read them all the time. And this is always kind of a small group as I look at it online. I mean, that's pretty common, but I do pick it up and read it later. That's what's so nice about this. If you're not available at the time of one of these educational events, you have lots of times to see those videos later. So that's significant. If you don't hear well, get hearing aids. Our brain likes that. Glasses are huge. So people who have vision difficulties or hearing problems, that affects your brain. So you need to take care of that. Cognitive, which we're doing now, interaction, puzzles, etc. Sleep has really bumped up. I did a whole talk on sleep here a few months ago. We know our brain likes to sleep. That's how it rests. That's how it gets rid of some of the plaque and the amyloids. And then exercise, again, I've got starred here. And boy, when I look at your newsletter, exercise read is just all over the place. like I say, I want to get to that Friday lion dancing. That's the one that's kind of sounds like fun. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to pay. There's no excuse not to try out line dancing, which I've wanted to do. So
Yes, we have. I think that that is one of our more popular activities. I think we do it 3 or 4 times a week now with different folks leading it.
and
And
is it in your main auditorium there?
some are there, some groups are large, and so we're renting space at the rowing club across the
That's
street.
so fun. That is just so fun. That is just really great. So, talk about your brain. You've got music going, you've got exercise going. There's a whole thing right now about music. I mean, I knew it already, but music is really bumping up and what it can do in your brain, the music and how it stimulates your brain. So that's all great. By the way, we just talked about preventable things, and New York Times says 62% of dementia is preventable. That's pretty great. And 40% by the UW, they say it's presentable. I just had a gardener show up. We'll see how noisy that is out there. He only comes every 2 weeks, and I never know when he's coming. So it happens to be today at 2 o'clock.
Sounds okay right now. We're fine.
Yeah, we're fine. He hasn't done anything. I just saw the truck come in and I thought, who is that? Okay, so what there's doing for new testing, there's been some new drugs out with high hopes. None of them, to my knowledge, have proven to be the answer. So some of them have been taken off the market, and they're all trying to stabilize. And the ones they had just made a few months different, and they had to be followed up with spinal taps. And so, to my knowledge, we do not have a new drug that is significant, although I haven't done one of the Alzheimer's conferences, which I can do online, in at least 6 months, and it changes real fast. I still get their newsletters regularly, and the amount of money still pouring in. A lot of research has been taken away from our universities, so I don't know exactly how that's going. The study that I've reported to people in the last year, which you may or may not have heard me talk about, is Dr. Doggett, University of Washington. That is phenomenal what she's doing. She's looking at the tau and the plaque, which we know you can see when people have Alzheimer's. But what she's looking at is, we know there's normal tau and plaque, and she's looking at what makes that change. Why does it change to a substance that is no longer doing what it should do? And so she had funding to do studies with animals a year ago, and I just don't know where that is, but that was pretty exciting, a little different than some of the other studies, trying to look at why does that change. So that's just one of them I think is pretty great. Okay, sleep studies are another one they've done more with lately. All right, so I think we're just kind of at key things. I'm open for questions. Anything
Yeah,
else?
anybody have a comment or question for Rosalys?
This is a comment, and I have told Rosalys this before, but on reading her book, one of the things that I was so taken with was, you don't leave or come back or anything without giving a hug or a kiss to your sweetheart. And I certainly have added that into our daily comings and goings. And it's it's really nice for your relationship, even if nobody has Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I really love all those Gottman things, because I had, helped with the Gottman study for the new parents at Swedish Hospital. So it was all right there for me when I wrote the book, and the book has its chapters and then insights at the end. So it's easy to spot them. But the Gottman stuff flows through there, and I'm quite confident that's why Mike and I stayed in love till the very end.
Isn't that wonderful? Yeah.
And then I just wanted to end, as Bonnie and Clarence know, I have a new person in my life, which is quite nice. His name is Ken. And I have a spot where people can put boats here. And so he was coming over to rent a slip from me. And I looked in the back seat, and there was a young gal who'd just taken a childbirth class from me. That was his daughter. And so I knew her, but didn't know him. And Ken and I talked in the driveway for 3 years. And when he invited me out, I had no idea. I mean, is this a date? I'd been married 45. It'd been 50 years since I'd done anything like that. And so
Talk about new chapters.
Absolutely. I saved that for one of the last chapters I wanted to share with you. And it was a real pleasant, lovely surprise. And so we've been going out now about 6 or 7 years, hard to believe. And no plans to make that permanent with a wedding or live together, but he's a very nice person. And one of the things that brought it up for me, Bonnie, is that how's my sound? I've got a little blower out there right now. We're doing okay. Anyway, Bonnie, that's one of the things I'm very conscientious of, departures and reunions. And we just met mutual friends in Kingston. We didn't have much time because they're from out of town, and we only had an hour with them this morning at 10. And of course, he came from his location on Bainbridge. I came from mine. And when we met in the parking lot, there was a hug and a greeting. And when he departed, we did the same thing. And I'm just real conscious of not missing up on doing that. And with Mike, I mean, the very, very last days, always before of course you do it when you're home all the time, but if I went to work or went grocery shopping and he was here with a caregiver, always said goodbye to him, always greeted when he came back. Huge, huge. Yeah. Okay, any other thoughts? I want to give a plug. I, as you can tell, love to present, as Dan, who helped me with the book. Here's the front end of the book, and you got to see the slide before. The front end of the book. And of course, it's readily available, Amazon, and you can get it at Plum and the bookstore on the island. Those are signed copies there. And if you have a church or you're in a club or you know an organization, even if they're not local, you know somebody in another community who'd like it, put the word out there, because I am real happy to present. And I am very pleased when anybody tells me they've discovered their book and that it's making a difference. I heard today about somebody who just heard about it at a luncheon meeting, and they ordered the book right away because somebody else at that meeting said, oh, this book might help you. And this person said, well, guess what? I was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And they ordered it off their phone immediately. And that just thrills me to hear that's what's happening. So
Well, it is a wonderful book that includes, as you were talking earlier, about not only your story, but insights and takeaways that are useful guideposts.
and I love the journal notes because I journaled, and so Mike's voice is there. You know, I give his quotes, what he was saying, and you can see the chapter on speech and see how it's changed over time. So yeah, it was a real inspiring organization of that book that Dan and I put together. So
It is always a pleasure to talk with you, Rosalys. Thank you for taking the time. And it's just great to hear how well this chapter is going. And it's a gift to all of us. So I'll put that slide up one more time. So
thank
people
you,
can.
Reese. It's always fun and a pleasure to be invited. And I hope to see some of you line dancing. Maybe I'll be there too.
That would be great. That would be great.
And thank you for everything you do at the Senior Center. You'll probably never know all the difference you're making and the Senior Center is making, but I just know you're extending people's lives and their health and their brain. It's absolutely huge. And it's one thing to talk about it, and then it's another one who's dedicated to making it happen. And you really are. You really.
I want to second that too.
I talked to other senior centers, and no one's doing any better than you here.
No,
really
I agree. I agree.
Very sweet. Thank you all. And
Thank you,
I'll see you
Rosalys.
all. I'll see you all line dancing.
Okay.
Good.